Hello and welcome to another season of My First Dungeon, the tabletop role-playing podcast that helps game masters learn new games and make each one better than the last. This season, we are partying in the last gasp of the Roaring Twenties in New York City as we paint the town red. That's right, we'll be playing Paint the Town Red, the new game from Soul Muppet Publishing, Zach Cox in collaboration with Johan Noor, and we are very excited to be getting this season off to a start. I am going to be hopping in the GM chair once again this season. Very excited to be doing that once again. So I'm going to have none other than our very own Elliot Davis come and join us as the host for this episode. Elliot, how you doing?
Hello! I am excited and ready to talk vampires.
Yeah.
Specifically, sad gay disaster bastard vampires.
Which is, to be fair, most vampires. That's you didn't really narrow it down very much.
Yeah, a lot of redundancy in that description. So Brian,
yeah,
you're GMing once again, hopping in the seat on another Soul Muppet banger. And as always on this show, we want to set you up for success as a GM, and there is no better way to set you up for success than by chatting with the designer of Paint the Town Red themselves, Zach Cox. Welcome back to My First Dungeon. Great to have you.
Yeah, thank you both so much for having me.
Yeah, we're very excited to be playing this one.
Super stoked. So Zach, before I go to Brian to talk about kind of where his nerves are at, I want to ask you in one sentence, if you can do it, what kind of story is Paint the Town Red trying to tell?
Oh God, one sentence, you've put me on the spot. It's about, I can use commas, right?
You can use commas.
It doesn't have to be
I can use commas. You can use semicolons.
Semicolons?
Semicolons. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. It's a game about being dead inside and wanting desperately not to be through the medium of hedonism, joy-seeking, and trying to find something more than what you are.
See, yeah, you could do one sentence. That was great.
Yeah, that went better than I was expecting. Like most of the things I do in role-playing game production, there's a lot of anxiety and then a short amount of frenzied work, and then something good appears, hopefully. So
that's just like being a creative, I think, in general, right? So, Brian,
yes,
turning it back to you. Before we get too deep into the mechanics and the whole mishigas of what goes into this game, what are you nervous about when it comes to running this game for the first time? Obviously, we know you're a great GM, but new systems, you always got that little bit of nervous. Where do the nerves lie when it comes to running Paint the Town Red for the first time?
So with Paint the Town Red, one of the things that is nice is that it is a very similar mechanical set, like just dice-wise, to both Orbital Blues and Best Left Buried. It's like the same dice system, so I don't have to worry too much about that. Like that very core thing feels pretty good. But I'm not like I feel like vampire stories are not my bread and butter. It's not a thing that I watch a lot of. It's something I'm familiar with, but not like a deep fan of. So it's just like making sure I hit the moments that you want to see in like a sad vampire story, which I think I'm feeling okay about. I think that'll be good. But my real bit of nerves about this game is that it's not a typical like adventure in the sense of it's not a quest to like, save the fair maiden from the dragon.
Right. You're not Mario in this game.
And you can't easily map it onto like, you can't fall back and map it onto fantasy or D&D or some kind of like swords and sorcery thing in the way that you could with a lot of other games if you really wanted to. So finding that really, I think it's going to be the first session is finding what a session and a quote unquote adventure of Paint the Town Red feels like. And just because this is like a slightly different vibe of a game that I haven't really played before, it's a little more slice of life, but less guided than, something like Yuzeo's Bed and Breakfast. It'll be that first session of me just being like, what does this look like? And then once you figure out what it looks like, you're like, oh, great, I can play 30 more sessions. But it's that first session of figuring out, hey, what is this?
Yeah.
And I'm excited to talk, Zach, to you about, hey, what is this?
Yeah, Zach, that's an easy question. Hey, what is this?
Oh, yeah. So Paint the Town Red is a game where you are a vampire, a dead person, a walking corpse. Something very bad happened to you a very long time ago, and that killed you. That's a metaphor for lots of things, trauma, depression, anxiety, a breakup, some kind of injury, some big event happened, and now you're persisting despite of that. Your character is somewhere in a city, the city of that era, according to the sort of premise for the game. You've come together to this place. You've found other dead people like you, and you're together with that group trying to chase that sensation of what feeling alive once was. Obviously, it's meaningfully different now. Things have changed for you, but you're looking to kind of be happy. And we call it a sad game, but actually it's about not wanting to be sad and wanting something more than your life is at the moment and chasing that through the medium of this role-playing game adventure, right? Which, as Brian alluded to, sort of clear from the notes of the book, it doesn't feel like a heroic quest. It's not swords and sorcery. There is no kingdom you're trying to save. It feels less of a fantasy quest and more of a messy night out on the town where you're getting things wrong, making mistakes, going too far, not doing enough, not listening to yourself and your body and your friends around you, and then dealing with the consequences of that, both on that night out and beyond. So really, it's like less of a quest and more of a pub crawl. Your sort of night on the town. And that's the advice I'm sort of giving in the book. Like, consider stuff that would happen at house parties and nightclubs and bars and have that affect the characters you make, and also the sort of the stories and the impacts and the tales you want to tell using it.
Right.
I do think the line you said there of it's a game about trying not to be sad is actually a great like through line and just kind of like North Star for both me as a GM and for the players. Of you're not leaning into being sad. You're leaning into trying to do anything you can to not focus on the truth of your life, which is that you are a sad vampire.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting mechanical difference to Orbital Blues, right? Because that very much is a game about being sad. For anyone who's listened to your season of the 21st Night of September and all those guys, your characters are gaining experience points by role playing that they're sad or bluesy or reflecting on their past or traumatized or nostalgic or whatever, depending on the trouble they have. And that's how your character progression happens. The sort of funny tagline we use, we describe the game as being sad for XP. Instead of getting treasure or, killing monsters or, doing quests being the way you level up by like having the symptoms of whatever depression or anxiety or trauma is driving you as a person, right? And whereas we've gone sort of it's exploring a similar idea in that it's a game about being sad, but Paint the Town Red is very different texturally because of that thing I mentioned, right? It's not about wallowing in sadness. It's about running from it desperately with a frenzy. You're pushing away from that. And there are moments where you're sort of encouraged to role play it by the situation you're in. You have this score called your pulse, right? Which is effectively your health. If Orbital Blues is sad for XP, this game is sad for HP. And we essentially track how happy and human and alive your character is feeling through the score and sort of encourage you emotionally to role play within that space, right? There's less incentives to do it like in Orbital Blues, but really you're trying to get throughout the session that pulse score as high as you can and chasing the sensation of being alive. Sometimes that means indulging in your passions, which is like the hobby or habit or behavior that your vampire finds joy and humanity in, right? The thing that defines who they are at this point.
Having read some of the passions, hobby is a very funny word to put on.
Yeah, I mean, the list is quite varied, right? Because some of them are like gambling or alcoholism or going to the but some of them are like going to the theater or being a sculptor.
True,
right?
True.
And there's sort of by nature, it's about being caught up in that thing in a way that people tend to do when they're doing something they love and they care about, and abandoning consequence when they do it, or not abandoning it, caring about it less, right? And chasing the dragon, right? Of living. And as you do that, as your pulse increases, you're sort of chasing that experience. And it might be indulging in a passion. It might be drinking someone, because like drinking blood in this game is the passion that all vampires have. And what you have is this alternative to murdering people and drinking their warm blood to make your heart feel warm and your body hot. Like
right.
In this game, I think it's really important to understand that like drinking blood is not a biological or magical compulsion of the undead. It's something that vampires do because it makes them feel nice in like a really horrid way to visualize it. Like, you know, your characters are dependent upon that sensation of wanting to be happy. And in some way, this is a game where also the gameplay loop involves that, like, instead of these passions, you can find bonds, which are like people you care about, right? Things that matter to you. I wanted to make a game where falling in love was overpowered. Like, you know, you could having people you care about as these characters that are like traditionally like edgy, melodramatic people with all these problems to do with them and all this baggage they're bringing with them as an undead person, making a situation where like mechanically the best thing for you to do is to have a sweetheart is really beautiful in the space of the themes and the stories that we're trying to tell.
So, Zach, we obviously are fans of Orbital Blues, so we know this dice system pretty well that you're using in this system. But what is the core dice rolling mechanic? What does it look like when we're rolling dice, and how is it different from Orbital Blues, if at all?
Okay, so your characters have 3 stats in the game: savagery, allure, and duplicity, which conveniently spells sad, thanks to the machinations of one of my playtesters. So your vampire has the stats sad. You roll 2d6, and you add your stat to that. It's usually a number between, it's either 0, 1, or 2. You're looking for a 9. That is how it works. It's a fixed target. Like in Orbital Blues, you have advantage and disadvantage, which we call the upper hand and against the odds, allowing you to roll 3 dice and either drop the lowest or the highest. That's how we make situations more and less difficult. The main difference from Orbital Blues is that in Orbital Blues, when you want to reroll the dice, you lose a heart. In Paint the Town Red, you gain a chaos. And that's one of the things that's going to drive you towards making things horrid and more messy for yourself, as you just end up re-rolling more dice and accepting even more consequences. And that sort of relates to your character's undead prowess appearing as you do things.
Throughout the game, pulse and chaos are 2 numbers that are going to change pretty dramatically.
Yeah.
What are some of the most common ways that pulse and chaos can change?
Oh, yeah. So chaos is going to change when you roll dice you don't like. And also if a human sees you using one of your powers of undeath, like each character has like one ability they can do. They might be able to like transform into an animal or detect lies or become mist or something, just so we can add some of that creepy vampire prowess. And then pulse is going to change when you might be in a combat, you lose some damage due to an attack, spend time with a bond or indulge in your passions. Those both cause your pulse and chaos to move around a lot. Also, your chaos goes down at the end of your session when you're doing consequences. There's like lots of moments when all of those numbers do that. And you can also voluntarily choose to lose pulse at any time if you feel like something happens that would suck for your character. And that's how you level up in the same way, right?
I guarantee our players are going to be voluntarily losing pulse left and right.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely not a very good way of gaining new abilities, but we put it in there and you can just at some point just tank it. But yeah, they move around all the time. I definitely would have forgotten a few of them. Those numbers are going to be moving around all the time because I want you to ricochet between all those different emotional states that a vampire can be in that we might talk about in a bit.
So you talked about a few of the like kind of key things that you're keeping track of as a player and as a GM in terms of like pulse and passion. The other score I want to get into is chaos and how that kind of comes into play and how pulse and chaos sort of play off of each other.
Yeah, so these are the 2 sort of stats that you're tracking the sort of pools that you would have, the equivalent of your heart and your blues in orbital blues. Depending on those two numbers, your character is in a different emotional state and is sort of tracking where they are emotionally as a person, right? Pulse is a measure, like I said, of how like human you're feeling, which is emotional, social, and biological, kind of all smushed together into one number. And then chaos is how much of a disaster you are in a given moment.
Yeah.
How chaotic you are, and how this has an impact on the city around you and things reacting to you in that way. It sort of means there's 4 like states a vampire can be in. If your pulse is low and your chaos is low, then you're sort of like this shriveled up, pathetic creature curled up in a corner that doesn't want to exist, right? You're not doing anything. If your chaos is low but your pulse is high, you are like a functioning normal human being, in that you do not feel like a monster in the fact that you're not cold, pale, and dead, or running around eating people. So you can sort of blend in with human society easier. If you're high chaos, low pulse, it means that like you're sort of running around being chaotic, but it's gone badly for you. You're sort of in that state of things going wrong. You have a hangover. It's going badly. You're sort of chaotic, but feeling awful and monstrous. Whereas if your pulse is high and your chaos is high, then you feel alive and you're probably drinking someone dead or at a nightclub or full of opiates and joy. You know, who knows what it might be? It depends on the character. But like, those are like the 4 emotional zones that a vampire can sit in. And your characters are going to be in different positions at different times. And as those things hook together, you're kind of going to find other people in those same spaces and multiply each other and become like you are, but bigger.
Right.
You know, the other thing worth thinking about is that like the chaos depends how you're going to interact with factions and contacts around you, like the sort of mechanics of the city. And they also sort of dictate how a bunch of the pacing tools we use in the game work, right? Because unlike Orbital Blues, there is like a really fundamentally baked into the game session structure we encourage you to use as you're like walking through running your early sessions. Like, I think that as you become more advanced and you've played the game more, you feel more comfortable, you can understand that like anything in an RPG, they are like tools and guidance that can be ignored if you have confidence, right? But a sort of quite, not rigid, but emotionally structured setup for you to kind of take the early stages of your adventure through.
I feel like that's like, in reading the quick start, something that you become really aware of in this book is that this book is such a toolkit. It is just chock-a-block full of tools for GM and players. I love this quadrant sort of idea of like low pulse, low chaos, all the way to high pulse, high chaos. That both feels like a great tool as a player, but also a great tool as a GM for if you're like, hey, I'm bringing in an undead NPC. Where would I place them right now? I don't need to track it actual numbers wise, but where would I put them in this like 4 ways an undead can be sort of spectrum? The other thing you brought up there was this idea of this is a more phase structured game in terms of how a session looks like. And I know that's one of the things that Brian is kind of nervous about is not having a quest, not having a quote unquote adventure. This is sort of the pun that came to mind, and I'm gonna forgive me for this, is a slice of unlife game. Where
all right,
where give me a sec. I need to DM my marketing manager quickly. Slice of unlife. Let me write that down.
Yeah.
Sorry, continue your question while I further
while I make moves.
Slice of unlife. You can't stop hustling if you want to make money doing RPGs, my friends.
Can't stop hustling. So what I want to ask is just like, what does a session look like for Brian, like going into this? What does that look like?
The way the sessions are structured is that it's built into a couple different phases. The first is this little vignette piece that we call It's All Happening Tonight, right? So you start off with each of your characters, you work out where they are in the emotional scale. Are they high pulse, high chaos, low chaos? And then you put them into different groups depending on where they are emotionally, and then you roll a dice for each of them. right? This generates a little random encounter that kind of says where the character is emotionally and possibly physically and possibly in terms of activity. And then you narrate a quick little scene that basically puts them somewhere in the city doing something related to somewhere, something, someone, right? Sometimes those characters are together. If you roll the same dice on the table, then you're more likely to be doing a certain thing. But it basically means that you have this beautiful little opening scene, kind of like the, I think it's called the cozy move in Brindlewood Bay, the sort of where you display the character doing something in between sessions, right? You know, making tea or reading a book or doing something cozy, right? But this is normally doing something to do with depression or parties, because this isn't Brindlewood Bay, this is Paint the Town Red. And then after that initial scene, you bring all the characters together into a space, and that is sort of enabled by the fact that a bunch of the prompts encourage you to go and do something after you've done it. So if your character is sad and depressed, you're encouraged to like find another player and go and insert yourself into their scene. And if your character is doing okay and is happy and getting on with it, you're going to be pulled into a different scene by another character to pull them out of their mess, right? So it kind of makes these initial starting scenes that, depending on who is being the most idiotic, stupid, and emotional at the start, is going to drag all of these other characters with them and thrust them in towards something that they want, right? And that next part is like part 2, which has this really useless piece of advice, just like, and now play the role-playing game, shove, push. You kind of say, your characters probably want something. They want to get a thing or do something or go just have a party, right? Because that's the default option. You probably just want to be happy, so let's find a bar somewhere and have a nice time, do our thing, eat some people, indulge in some passions, meet people we like. And then that bit's called Paint the Town Red, because I think the bit of playing the game should just be named after the game. And then we push our characters into that and we ask them to do stuff. The GM is sort of encouraged to, if you feel like this is dragging, then here's some things you could do, right? There's some suggestions. And those are framed for both the player and the GM, right? Say, I want to talk to someone, introduce a character doing something annoying, to sort of all these little tools and textures for moving the thing around, right? But essentially, as a GM, you're sort of meant to be quite reactive here, because like, this isn't your time. This is the player's time to do things that they want, right? And then your bit comes later. So you have that reactive thing that most of the time involves finding a lurk, like a place that vampires hang out. We'll talk more about those in a minute, but it's generally like a place full of interesting people to talk to, and then push them towards that, and then they go do something.
Right.
And then you play a session, and then towards the end of the session, you have like a bit of downtime, which is basically one prompted character action that you can do without interaction with something else. There's a couple of options, but some of our leveling up quests here, there's stuff to do with finding new passions, meeting new people, investigating locations, kind of interacting with the currency economy of the game, kind of just letting you do a little thing. And then at the end of the session are the consequences, right?
Right.
And this is dealing with the outcome of your actions on the city as players, right? So we've got, depending on the character has the highest chaos, they have had the most impact on the city. We all give them a round of applause for being the biggest, craziest vampire. And then they get a load of consequences based on how high their chaos was, right? And those might be something like a character you know doesn't like you anymore. A faction does something. This other bad thing happens to a different character. Like these sort of randomly generate little pushbacks that are kind of, when the smoke clears and the dust settles, what soft violence happens around you as a result of your actions.
Right.
And this is the time when like the GM gets to turn the screws based on all the stupid decisions that your characters inevitably made while partying too hard, and sort of pushing in that direction. And then there's a little bit of a time skip, maybe a day, maybe a week, but it's essentially the next time something interesting happens, and then we start from scratch. The idea is that combined takes about a session, but actually it's going to take as long as it needs to, right? And you just keep cycling. And that's the advice I give initially. Like, I'll try to keep this to a session because you've got like about 3 hours, maybe. I play this game in super short games. Like I think if you played a 4-hour session of Paint the Town Red and let your characters mess everything up for that whole time, then the city would fall apart very quickly.
You get one night in the city.
One night, and then it's happened before. And the good thing about it is that because of the structure of the way the adventures are written, which I can talk more about in a minute, the game to run feels very reactive. It feels very yes, Andy as a GM, and it feels very low prep because really you don't have to like come up with all these plots and generate all of these dungeons because generally like the city's too big for you to map everything, right? If I wanted to write every encounter in the whole of London 1862 as per the quick start, then we'd be here for a while because even the city state of the Invincible Overlord is actually a lot smaller than that. It covers a couple blocks, really. So, like, that's just the space that you operate in. You're sort of waiting for them to make stupid mistakes, which they will do because that's the genre they're playing in.
Right.
And then action happens from there.
To start, I love that there's like such this clear structure for me to play with because it is just like, okay, I don't fully know what I'm doing. Great. You can lean back on this 4-part structure and that's going to get you a lot of the way there. And I think on this show, we've been playing a lot of games that are very low prep or no prep. And obviously, like, doing a podcast, we do it a little differently than we might do for a home game. But I'm curious from your perspective, if I was to prep anything, like ranking in terms of like the most important things to kind of like plan ahead to the least important, are there any things that you would call out and say like, hey, maybe plan a couple of these, or should it just be looking to the book for contacts and factions and locations?
Can I talk about the structure of the adventure? Because I feel like giving this answer about the adventure beforehand would be a bit difficult. So there's like a couple of main components that we have in the adventure. There are 12 locations split into a few different categories. There are 3 lurks, which are like vampire nightclub gathering locations like the Elysiums in your Vampire the Requiem or Masquerade. Mm-hmm. And then there are your hollows, which are spooky places where vampires are sad and other sort of undead are that you tend to avoid. They're like your sort of the closest thing we have to a dungeon, like your monster quest hook sort of things if you need one. Then there are 6 locations that are like iconic within the city's mortal history normally, that each has a faction associated with them, right? And each of those factions is like a organized, gathered group of undead that isn't like your little gang of party vampires, right? They are older, more conservative, more control orientated in the culture of the city they live in. They have locations and occupations and things they own, right? And they are sort of inherently antagonistic to your characters because they've been setting up this social conservative regime over the city. They've built these power structures, which then your characters are appearing and providing chaos to. Just by existing and having passions, you are a threat to these undead. So they are like the most antagonistic characters that you can have in the game. And that's what's going to happen. They're going to be forcing the majority of the consequences from you that you gain by painting the town red. Then the other thing that exists in the adventure are these contacts, which are like other undead that are like you. They are not necessarily young, but like have the energy of cool young people who you actually might want to hang out with and are looking for the same things as you are. Love, safety, happiness, rather than coercive control over mortals and other vampires. And they are sort of the meat of the book is like all of these weird and interesting characters, each with their own passions and wants and desires and relationships and feelings that are designed to be like, if you went to a party, this is the coolest person that would be at that party that you'd want to speak to. And obviously, they're sort of the things you smash together and create relationships to, along with the lurks and the hollows to kind of make stuff appear. As written, I'd randomly generate them if I wanted to have someone at a party. I'd roll. There's 2 choices. You either let the players choose or pick the one that makes the most sense. But if I was doing any prep, I'd be looking at the characters I have, right? And then working out which of the contacts and factions are going to be the most emotionally resonant with the characters you have on your board, right? So if you have a vampire who is, bloodlusted, deeply into fighting, loves killing people, how are they going to feel about the fact that there's gladiators doing blood sport in the Roman Colosseum, right? Or equally, how is a character that used to be a Roman slave going to feel about those same slaves being eaten by vampires in the Colosseum, right? Sort of, you want to get the characters that can have the most sort of crunch with those things. Instead of randomly generating them, smash them together, put them in front of your characters and allow chaos to appear.
Sure.
Generally, like, if I ever want to have, well, I need something to happen here, I flip through the NPC list and I have one of the characters from the factions just appear and say the most vile, repulsive, conceited thing that a person could say in that situation to wind them up. The example that I can think of the most of that is that we had a character who was playing Marcus Favonius. So in ancient Rome, this is the poet in Julius Caesar, right? Who remembers being at Caesar's murder and was there and used to love Caesar and thought he was really great. And then one of the vampires who murdered Caesar appears and says, "Oh, I recognize you. You were there when we killed Caesar." And then obviously that's going to make a big emotional thing, right? And then immediately after that, the vampires all murdered and burnt down Rome and fled to Alexandria in a boat the next morning, because that's what you got to do. You got to dangle bad decisions in front of your characters. Like that's the thing that pushes them forward. That's what I mean by being reactive, right?
Right.
Instead of be like, I know that this session I'm going to put this thing here and do that. Just give them this thing that they want to have something, own something, have a feeling, chasing a sensation, and then put it in front of them just out of reach, just to the point where, I know doing this is the stupidest fucking thing I could do in this situation, but I really want it, right? You want to prepare those gut punch bad decisions, because even if they take what we consider the boring option, right, that is still an interesting decision as a character, and that's entertaining, So I'd almost, in the realm of things to prep, just work out how to press the buttons of each vampire and propel them into reckless action.
Yeah.
But ultimately, that will happen almost guaranteed out of the ways that the city has been written as a place for impulsive, explosive people to make bad decisions. And it's all already been set up so that you don't really have to do any work at all. And the characters themselves will tear apart the city for you, but you might be able to make it happen faster.
Midnight Muscadines is a cozy, dark tabletop role-playing game where light and shadow intertwine in a fractured world. Players take on the roles of marmoteers, brave adventurers who journey into the untamed wilderness to collect the elusive Midnight Muscadines, craft magical jams, and protect the fragile light of Nim. Through collaborative storytelling and resourceful gameplay, players weave tales of courage, community, and the pursuit of balance. Will you preserve the light, uncover the truths hidden in the shadows, or reshape the balance of the world forever? Midnight Muscadines is perfect for fans of Studio Ghibli and Sea of Stars who seek to capture the magic of exploration and the heartfelt adventure in a world where small heroes make a big impact. Play Midnight Muscadines as a traditional GM'd game, GMless, or even solo. Midnight Muscadines is crowdfunding now on BackerKit. Join the campaign at pandeongames.com/muscadines.
I'm Quinns of tabletop role-playing game review show Quinn's Quest, and this is Play to Find Out. Play to Find Out is an actual play podcast that brings notorious old games from the 80s and 90s back to the table. Each season of Play to Find Out, I'm joined by Emily Johnson and Rob Morgan.
Good? Nervous?
Yeah.
You both looked at each other really concerned, like you think what's about to happen is going to be unpleasant. And frankly, I think that's rude. And together, we explore the TTRPGs of ages gone by. Our goal, to separate the TTRPGs that deserve to be remembered from those that maybe don't. I don't know, Emily. It was the 80s.
Also,
A
how
lot
do
of
you
people
know?
were on cocaine. We blow the dust from decrepit systems to learn how they work. Your 100 on the encounter table bursts out. Right, you've encountered a bug. Get ready. Don't laugh.
There's one get ready for a fog.
Don't laugh. Encounter their unique quirks.
I do finger guns to cover up how I wince.
A weird thing happens as you do finger guns.
Oh no.
And I'm hoping that the Quinn's Quest community will join us in exploring these games too. If you this up, cannot describe to you how much your adventure ends here.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because the best way to learn is to play to find out. Play to Find Out is available now on the Quinn's Quest Patreon, but the first episode of each series streams for free on the Quinn's Quest YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. Anyway, you failed the Earthtech roll, and you made jokes while I was doing my exposition, so you don't get to hear any more.
Oh, no. Come on.
I was shook as...
And this is a sort of unique opportunity for us in terms of My First Dungeons history, where Brian and I are actually writing an adventure for Paint the Town Red, It Never Sleeps, which is set in 1920s New York City. So we're working with sort of all of these pieces, which is a really unique opportunity for us as the show. I like to kind of be having the players inform the adventure in a lot of ways. So really looking forward to kind of making the New York version of Paint the Town Red. Within that, we talked about what a session looks like, but obviously we're going to be playing 4 sessions of this game. What does like a quote unquote arc of Paint the Town Red look like? What, like you mentioned that they burned down Rome and they fled to Alexandria in one of your playtests. Like where does a like story or chapter of Paint the Town Red end?
So there's a few like different loops in it. When I first envisaged the game, it was what I refer to as like a history crawl, right? Because your characters are immortal. That's the strength of vampire fiction, right? And setting all your vampire adventures in 1996 Chicago when you're living in 1997 Chicago is not a strength of the medium, right? I want to be able to play characters progressing through time and changing as they do so, right? So what we're sort of trying to do is that in each adventure that is going to last somewhere between 3 and 6 sessions, I think, depending on the group, obviously. You arrive in a city, you start meeting people, things happen, you lay down roots, you get the things you want, you start to build something. And then your own foolishness and impulsivity and chaos is going to put you in opposition against these factions. And because you are by nature opposed to those sort of people that we fill the city with, conflict arises. And essentially throughout the course of the game, you're going to tear down that city in some type of violence, and it's not going to be a place that's safe for you to live anymore. And then you either stay and decide it's important and something worth dying for and probably get killed, or you leave, we time skip some amount of time, we go to a new city, and then we do the same thing again there, right? And eventually, over the course of like a long campaign, there's more stuff you can do in there in terms of like the relationships of this group of people over like what could be thousands of years. You know, we've got adventures planned from 82 AD to 1928, right? So slightly less than 2,000 years is the full 6 campaigns that are going to be available during the Kickstarter. So there's going to be 6 different adventures. We've got Imperial Rome, Holy Roman Empire, Aachen, an adventure set in Ghazni, Afghanistan in the 800s, and then there's a big time skip. Then it goes Japan, London, New York. And then we've got stretch goals that will fill the gap in the middle, do more at the end, and then go more at the beginning. The idea is to have like potentially thousands of years of undead adventuring that you could do over this time. And there's obviously opportunities to tell all kinds of stories about aging and memory and empire and these characters moving around the world and trying to make spaces where they feel safe, because that's ultimately what we're chasing, right? The sensation of being alive and being safe in a space where you can be happy. That's what these characters, all of them, want are fundamentally. Maybe they don't act like it, but that's what the vampire of Paint the Town Red is seeking in the background. Happiness and a place on that Maslowian pyramid right at the top, but it's slick with blood and covered in corpses, you know. So a real rat race to the top there. But looking at those stories over time, and like, I'll be honest, I haven't finished a 20-session campaign of this game yet. I've just been doing lots of 1 and 2 and 3 shots to make sure the engine works, and it does. I'm super happy about that. There's a lot of stuff that's going to be in the expanded version of the book rather than the base game that is in the quick start that will sort of cover moving in between these cities. But the thing that's been most exciting in the adventure writing is, like, in the same way that your character is going to appear between multiple cities, right? Moving across time. We've got sort of like Easter egg, cameo, adventure reoccurrences, right? So some of the guys in your campaign that you're writing right now were also in Rome or Aachen or London and sort of like moving across through time. And there's a couple of core characters who I love particularly who are appearing in like most or all of these adventures doing weird and different things over time. And watching those NPCs develop between the adventures based on like what happens to them is really interesting. And also you'll be encouraged to have the characters that you cared most about in the adventure move between settings with you and change over time, right? Because ultimately there's a game here about like memory and progression and sort of like time drawn out, geological time measured through people's emotions, but also lots of parties, you know?
Yeah.
There's a few things I'm trying to do here at once.
Totally. But it's interesting. I mean, it's one of the things that one of our players called out in our pre-production meeting, of the thing that they've always find interesting in like fantasy is thinking about the time horizon of elves, and like how elves have to live for like thousands of years and watch all their friends die and like the world change around them. And it's like, this is very much, while not elves, vampires, that you're getting that like time horizon experience of like you're supposed to be from way in the past or sometime in the past, and like thinking through how this character has had to live and in the world that we, the players and GMs, like understand because it's like our own history. I think it's like a really fun relatability and fantastical thing in there.
It is fun to play around in the consideration of an experience that you as a human being will never have.
Yeah.
And like trying to extrapolate from your own lived experience. What would it look like if I did that 2,000 times? You know what I mean?
Right.
Going to space or being a dragon is like something hard enough to imagine, but being 2,000 years old would just be mad.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Even thinking about the scale of time laid out that grandly is terrifying.
Yeah.
And I think the way you do that is probably just a lot of getting very bored. And I think those passions being a really large part of that.
Yeah.
Needing something.
Even if you weren't drinking blood the first 200 years, probably by year 300, you're like, maybe I'll try this blood stuff.
Tell me about it. I got to check it out.
I want to go back to one of the other things, Brian, you said at the beginning, which was that vampires are not your go-to genre, or like you're not squarely within your wheelhouse.
Yeah.
And I think that there's two things about this game that make me feel like can alleviate your nerves there. One is we're setting it in this particular game, historical New York, which is a world you love and are very
city in the world, baby.
the greatest city in the world.
New York City.
A place you love, a place that like you just have fun facts oozing out of your ears about. Like, I think that you will make the city feel so lived in, and like this sort of historical fiction element will be fun for you. The other thing that's interesting about this game is that, Zach, you go for vampires, but you're like, right away, like when you start like planning your sessions, GM, you're like, okay, this isn't every vampire story that I've already heard. And one of the biggest ways is like this rollable Banes table. I just want to call out of like, you do so much world building by rolling these three ways that undead can die. Cause like you go into it with all your like preconceived notions of like garlic, steaks, what have you. But then you look at this list and there's a whole bunch of other stuff on there. Why was this sort of like a way you wanted to subvert or twist the vampire genre?
Yeah, so I've already sort of trodden with enthusiasm on the tropes of vampires existing a certain way. You know, the compulsion to drink blood doesn't exist. You can't, unless you take very specific abilities like bite other people and turn them into vampires. The curse of undeath is something that is spread magically for no reason that anyone can tell. Sometimes when someone dies, it just doesn't work, right? And then you are this cold, broiling, emotional, yet somehow magical revenant creature that I wanted to sort of build apart and work out how best to use it as a metaphor for things I wanted to talk about. As a result, I wanted to stray away from specifically like the very enforced pop culture tropes of traditional like Western European hammer horror and Bram Stoker inspired vampires, right? And kind of move to a larger culture, because one of the things that's true about human culture is that we are obsessed with ghosts and dead people, and we are obsessed with demons that drink blood. And if you go onto Wikipedia, you can find a list of undead and or blood-sucking creatures that is 1,000 long. Maybe not 1,000, but there's like hundreds of different types of vampire, right? And I'm not going to try list them because my knowledge is very bad and I do not want to say words incorrectly, but I've done lots of research about all these different things. Everything from, you know, vampires in the Philippines to India to Japan to Greece to North Africa to South America to Central America to like, you know, Native American ideas of what the undead can be, right? And try to pull ideas from all these different places and put them into this Bane's table. Because part of it was wanting to, and this is something that you can hopefully see throughout the random tables of the random characters you could play, right? Some of the characters are like, my name is Orlok and I am from Romania, right? That is like one option. But there's also like, I am this vampire from this weird part of history who goes here and does this, right? Your sort of sample characters. Because I wanted to do a slightly less Western imperialist take of this that you could appear in some types of vampire fiction where there is also like a lot of racism in a way that a lot of the famous and popular vampire role-playing games, which shall be remained unnamed, deal with their clans and covenants, right? So it was sort of like a almost like a remystification of undead, right? And a decolonialism take of it. That's obviously like the wrong combination of words. But so there's this big table of like 100 different ways you can kill an undead that are like the ones at the top are like, you know, beheading, stabbing them with a stake, drowning, sunlight.
The classics.
And then the further down you get, the more intensely batshit they get. And it's like chopping off their legs and replacing them with ones made from copper, right? Which is, I think, Greek. And then, like, there's lots of other inspirations. There's one where you, like, chop off the head of a vampire with a sword made from yew wood or something, which I think is, like, specifically something borrowed from Irish mythology about their revenants there, right? And then some of them are, like, fantastical equivalents. Some of them are like borrowed from history. There's like all the stuff about rice counting. So if you like leave rice outside the house, the vampire has to like stay and count it or whatever. I think that's one of the weirder Romanian ones, so the weirder Eastern European ones that are sort of borrowed in some parts by claiming that all vampires have OCD. And then there's lots of other sort of bits in there. But the idea is you randomly generate the way that kills your vampire at the start of the campaign, and that has like quite significant implications on the world building.
100%.
And the way it's generated is that you roll 1d6, so you get one of all the really common options, 1d20, which has got like a smaller skew but more of the standard stuff, and then 1d100 dice. And also your characters can generate more Banes as they become older and get nearly killed more, right? So all of these things are sort of things that you introduce, all of these subtextually coded like vampires who are things we want them to be metaphors for, have now all these new fears of strange and unnatural things that are ways it can kill them. And that has like big impact on a world building perspective. Like thinking of an example from a campaign, there's one of them that's like a black cat jumps over your grave. And so there was this one vampire in the playtest was like, oh, that's really cool. I'm going to be a cat lady. And she just like was a vampire with cats. And everyone was like fucking terrified of her because she's got this method of vampire killing just like domesticated that she's feeding almonds and milk, right? And it just really sort of latches onto the mythos. Like currently, if you see a guy with a sword made of wood, you're like, what is that about? But once you realize that, you know, if you have a limb chopped off by a yew tree, your vampire suddenly whizzes into dust. Like when you see 3 zombies with swords made of wood on their hips, you're like, oh shit. You know, there's this sort of iterative, impactive world building where a very seemingly insignificant role on a random table right at the start of the campaign can have lots of like theming later on in a way that sort of expands and explodes and weaves for all the other decisions that you can make later on. So that may be another thing to prep with. Like think about cool ways that the Banes you've got could impact your vampire communities. And also, it means you can have adventures in the daytime because you can't do that in Requiem or Masquerade. Sunlight might kill vampires. I think it's number 3 on the table or something.
Right.
But, you know.
Oh, there's a really like fun and exciting, like I think you used the word mythos, and it really feels like remythologizing like this whole idea of a vampire. Like it feels like there's there's no section in the book that says here are all the kinds of undead and how they act in the world. But like by playing and creating, you get this like sense that you're just getting a little peek into all like a few versions of what undeath looks like, and it really creates like a really rich, fantastical world. So it's not a question. I just really liked it.
I just like it.
There are other types of undead as well that we haven't like, because what we have here is the vampires being undead with passions, and thus like other types of character appear. I think like in the quick start there are some liches, some werewolves. I think there might be a ghoul and a ghost, but more of those things exist somewhere else. Right, there's a whole bunch of zombies under Highgate Cemetery, just smelling real bad. Oh, we haven't even talked about smelling party yet.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Because I was chatting with my friend Edwin, who's one of the developers on the game, credited that way, and the vampires. I was like, does it make sense that they can like smell blood if blood drinking is like habitual rather than compulsive? And they were like, no, but they should be able to smell dopamine. They should be able to smell party happening from some distance away. And then at some point it was developed so they can also smell sadness now. So like your vampires are moving around with this sort of chemical sensory understanding of the emotional landscape of the city. And that's why the hollows and the lurks are so significant, because they have like textural impact on the district around them by smelling good or terrible, right? And the other tool you've got in your toolbox is, as each vampire sleeps either by day or night, depending on what happens, they can like smell either happy or sad people throughout the city, and they sort of have these dreams of characters throughout the world who are like particularly emotionally strong within the setting. And that's one of the other things in the adventure. It's like lists of incredibly sad and happy people are included at a big table. That is sort of one of the ways that is also a really powerful pacing tool, and a sort of a way that you can drip feed information to your players, kind of push them in the right direction. But there's you've got this kind of re and de-mythologizing is kind of part of it. It's like making it more than what it would be if we just like copy pasted Bram Stoker's Dracula and added a bunch of stuff onto that. It's kind of a different take because we were trying to explore different things, different stories.
So kind of as we come to a close, Brian, I want to pop back to you and sort of do our check-in on how are you feeling? Where are you at? Are there any things that you're feeling better about that we talked about at the beginning? Are there things you're still nervous about? How are you feeling?
No, I'm feeling good. It's funny, as we talk more about this game, there's still a part of me that is like, instinctively looking for like that, like inciting incident type thing that would kick off like a more traditional, like, Campbellian story or something of like, oh, here's the inciting incident. That's going to be the quest of going. And I just have to keep kind of like tamping that down and being like, no, that's like not what this game wants to be. It wants to be just like slowly giving your players as many choices as possible to make the wrong choice, and then just like going down that hole until, like, more likely in this game than in other games, they just have to leave. They just got to like burn the city down and be like, all right, that was all for New York City. I'm going to Chicago now. And I think that's the switch in my head that is like still in the process of clicking, of like so many campaigns and seasons we've done on this game. By the time we get to the end, there is the quest has been completed. There is like a large catharsis there. And I think we will find it in this game, but it'll look different. And I'm like trying to I'm trying to tamp down my, I wouldn't say worst impulses, but impulses that don't necessarily belong in this game, of like, let me plan more plot and instead just be like, hey, here's a bunch of bad things that are going to happen to you guys. Make them worse.
A bunch
for
of
me.
weird people.
And let's,
yeah.
And let me, I think it is great in this game that one of the phases is just called consequences, and you just kind of mechanically roll for them in a way that like you will feel consequences. Like if you get too chaotic, if your passions go too low, or if you indulge too much, if your chaos gets too high, you're just gonna get hit left and right by the game. Like, I don't even have to do it as a game master. I'm gonna roll a die. I'm gonna tell you the bad thing that happens to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's gonna do a lot more to drive things forward than I even expect right now.
You obviously can do your like hero's journey, your Joseph Campbell 12-step meta myth with your Hero of 1,000 Faces, but like when you enter the cave, it has to be a nightclub full of blood and corpses. You just have to transport everything towards the messiest Saturday night of your life, and then move from there. And add, blood and corpses.
This comparison makes what I'm about to say makes no sense, and I recognize it. I'm putting it up.
Oh,
has anyone seen the movie Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist?
Uh-huh.
For whatever reason, there's a little part of me that is like looking to that as a arc, kind of, because it's just
slice
like
of unlife.
It is.
I'm gonna say it again.
Or even a better example is Martin Scorsese's After Hours, which is honestly, Zach, have you ever seen After Hours?
No, I have not.
This would be cool to you to watch, because it's not at all supernatural, but it takes place in like Soho in New York. I might rewatch it before this season, actually. It takes place in Soho in New York City, and it's a guy who goes out and like makes one bad decision, and it keeps getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And there's like no rhyme or reason to it. It's like, it feels kind of supernatural because it was like Soho in the 70s and 80s. And it feels like a horror or like a vampire film, but it's not at all. There's absolutely nothing supernatural. It's just bad goes to worse, goes even worse.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, but like also a bunch of the stuff in like the reading list Appendix M for this game has nothing supernatural in it whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Like, as much as What We Do in the Shadows and Carmilla is on there, also In Bruges, Leaving Las Vegas, and Lost in Translation also live on the Appendix N for this game pretty firmly. As
In
well
Bruges
as, like,
is such a good tone reference, I feel like.
Yeah.
It's not about like death at all, but it's clear to me like how much the director of that film hates Belgium. And, like, that is the way that I want all of these characters to feel about where they are until things aren't working. I really hope that Bruges is actually in Belgium and not in Holland. If it's not, then we're
it's in Belgium.
You got it. It's in Belgium.
It's in Belgium. Good. Perfect. Okay. So, but yeah, obviously Disco Elysium's on there as well, because like it is a Zach Cox game. But it doesn't need to be a cult to be a reference, because it's also about making bad decisions and metaphors.
Right.
I keep just saying metaphors.
Being a disaster bastard.
Yeah, metaphor for so many things at once. Yeah.
That's my favorite phrase of your marketing so far, is sad disaster bastards. It's great.
That's great.
Zach, is there any final pieces of advice you would leave our GM Brian with as we head into our first session of this game soon?
Yeah, just like obviously the thing I think is worth remembering, you've obviously talked about your enthusiasm and understanding of New York, but that is not necessary to run this game. I want you to paint with broad brushstrokes and make something that is authentic where possible, and compelling where it is not, and understand that it's a vibes-based game and you should be vibes-based with your history as well. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's like for you, but also for anyone listening who feels like intimidated by the idea of a game in a city they don't know, in a time period they're not familiar with. Use the tools in the adventure as like texture to allow your players to fill in that space for you as well, because it's their responsibility to make the city feel authentic and lived in as well. So you don't have to just, slavishly read history books like I have, because I'm writing an adventure that I expect other people to play. But I very much have, taken extreme liberties with history while writing a lot of this stuff, particularly by saying that a bunch of people are dead. So it's not actually set on Earth. Have fun.
Yeah, it's like I know that 1929 New York subways didn't use subway tokens, but I like subway tokens as a romantic little thing, so I'm going to have them in the game.
Yeah.
So Zach, also before we go, we've talked a lot about the game mechanics and how to play this game, but I think it is important to talk about the art of this game because you're collaborating with a pretty well-known art director. You want to tell us a little bit about the art for this game?
If you haven't already, and we did not make that clear, there is a free quick start for this game that you can get on the Som website or Drive for RPG or itch.io. Or, I was about to say wherever you get your RPG PDFs. Those are the three places you can get it. So there is nowhere else. But we worked really hard on putting that together, and my collaborator on this as our art director was the incredible Johan Noor, who you might know from Morkborg, Cyborg, and Into the Odd as like a member of the Stockholm cartel. Was really excited. I've been trying to work with Johan for years, like literally years. I think I've asked him to do every book that we've done since like 2021. And he's been like, no, I need some more time to do this one. But when I realized we were doing this project, I sort of knew this was the one I was really shooting for and was super excited to work with him on it. The game is like, in this current state, there's only like a couple of like actually illustrated art pieces, but the direction that we all came up with together was kind of looking at the emotional state of the vampire having like a real influence upon the setting and the shape and the color of the city as it exists. And sort of, you have some pieces where the vampire is sad and like all of these murky lines and restricted color palettes and these little drops of red and these undistinct blurred cities. And then you have when the vampires are indulging in their passions, the shapes of the world are sharp and bright and colorful, and the world is almost exploding around them. And in the same way that we're depicting the emotional journey of the characters through the art, it also appears through the layout. We've got this blood pouring out of the gutters of the book, and at the start of each chapter, it's this sort of like bloody red mess in the gutters, this like restrained straight line. And as you progress through each chapter, it gets brighter and broader and messier and redder and kind of creeps out of the page and starts like attacking the text and the art. And you can sort of see the emotional journey of the characters through the way the book is laid out, which is just so much smarter than anything I could ever come up with as a book designer. And we've started hiring like loads of artists for working on the book with us, kind of pushing through and depicting all these different time periods. But right now we're sort of working with a lot of like messed up public domain art and kind of putting stuff that feels vampiric in there, even when it isn't explicitly vampiric. Lots of images of parties and cities and weird bits of Harry Clarke art of woodcuts of people crawling out of the earth. And then moving towards to like making this beautiful high production book. And you'll be able to see all of that stuff live on the project page in a couple of weeks when the project goes live, but you should be able to go now and follow and see some early bits.
And you should go and pick up the quick start right away, if for no other reason than to see those blood gutters in action, because I am obsessed with
Blood gutters
the
are
blood
great.
gutters.
It is also great to see some of those bits of like not like very not vampiric art of like just like a party that's happening. And my first thought is, who in this picture is a vampire?
Right.
in a very fun way.
Well, Brian, we've come to the end. How are you feeling? You feeling ready for session 1?
I'm feeling good. I can't wait for session 1. I think this is going to be, I mean, hey, we're just role-playing parties, and they're just going to go to shit. How much more fun can you have?
In the greatest city in the world,
In the
New
greatest
York,
city
baby.
in the world, damn it, New York
I'm walking
City.
here.
Hey, I'm walking in.
Hey, I'm blood-sucking here.
Zach Cox, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming and chatting with us. We cannot wait to play this new game.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, guys.
And that is all for this episode of My First Dungeon, Paint the Town Red. Join us next episode for our Session 0, where a very cool cast of performers is going to be putting together some very sad vampires. And remember, if you're having fun, you're already doing it right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you're hearing this, that means you listened to every last second of this episode. And if you simply cannot wait until the next episode drops, you should head over to patreon.com/myfirstdungeonpod and become a member of the Dice Pool. Splash! For just a few bucks a month, you'll get cast talkbacks, original games, and a full-length bonus actual play each and every month. As of the end of 2023, there's already over 20 hours of bonus audio, plus a whole bunch of other goodies to enjoy. So head on over to patreon.com/myfirstdungeonpod and jump on into the dice pool. We'll see you there. Splash!